Aretha Franklin, whose exceptionally expressive singing about joy and pain and faith and liberation earned the Detroit diva a permanent and undisputed title, the Queen of Soul, died August 16th at her home in Detroit. She was 76. Gwendolyn Quinn, Miss Franklin's representative, announced the death and said the cause was pancreatic cancer. One of the most celebrated and influential singers in the history of American popular music, Miss Franklin secured lasting fame in the late 1960s and early 1970s by exploring the secular sweet spot between sultry rhythm and blues and the explosive gospel music she'd grown up singing in her pastor father's Baptist church. The result was potent and wildly popular, with defining soul anthems that turned Miss Franklin into a symbol of Black pride and women's liberation. In her indelible late 1960s hits, Miss Franklin brought the righteous fervor of gospel music to secular songs that were about much more than romance. Hits like Do Right Woman, Do Right Man, Think You Make Me Feel Like. A Natural Woman and Chain of Fools defined a modern female archetype, sensual and strong, long-suffering but ultimately indomitable, loving but not to be taken for granted. When Miss Franklin sang Respect, the Otis Redding song that became her signature, it was never just about how a woman wanted to be greeted by a spouse coming home from work. It was a demand for equality and freedom and a harbinger of feminism, carried by a voice that would accept nothing less. Miss Franklin had a grandly celebrated career. She placed more than 100 singles on the Billboard charts, including 17 top 10 pop singles and 20 No. 1 R&B hits. She received 18 competitive Grammy Awards, along with a Lifetime Achievement Award in 1994. She was the first woman inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1987, its second year. She sang at the inauguration of Barack Obama in 2009, at pre-inauguration concerts for Jimmy Carter in 1977 and Bill Clinton in 1993, and at both the Democratic National Convention and a memorial service for the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. Aretha Louise Franklin was born in Memphis on March 25, 1942. Her mother, Barbara Siggers Franklin, was a gospel singer and pianist. Her parents separated when Aretha was 6, leaving her in her father's care. Not only that, but her mother died 4 years later after a heart attack. C.L. Franklin's career as a pastor led the family from Memphis to Buffalo and then to Detroit, where he joined the New Bethel Baptist Church in 1946. With his dynamic sermons broadcast nationwide and recorded, he became known as the man with the golden voice. The Franklin household was filled with music. Mr. Franklin welcomed visiting gospel and secular musicians, the jazz pianist Art Tatum, the singer Dinah Washington, and gospel figures like the young Sam Cooke, before his turn to pop, Clara Ward, Mahalia Jackson, and James Cleveland, who became Miss Franklin's mentors. Miss Franklin started teaching herself to play the piano, there were 2 in the house, before she was 10, picking up songs from the radio and from Miss Ward's gospel records. Around the same time, she stood on a chair and sang her first solos in church. But amid the success, Miss Franklin's personal life was in upheaval. Songs like Think, Chain of Fools, and The House That Jack Built hinted at marital woes that she kept private. She fought with her husband and manager, Mr. White, who had roughed her up in public, a 1968 Time magazine cover story noted, and whose musical decisions had grown increasingly counterproductive. Before their divorce in 1969, she dropped him as manager and eventually filed restraining orders against him. She also went through a period of heavy drinking before getting sober in the 1970s. Miss Franklin was married to the actor Glenn Turman from 1978 to 1984, and the divorce was amicable enough for her to sing the title song for the television series A Different World when Mr. Turman joined its cast in 1988. Miss Franklin's father was shot during a break-in at his home in 1979 and stayed in a coma until his death in 1984. During those years, Miss Franklin shuttled monthly between her home in California and Detroit. As her marriage to Mr. Terman was ending, she moved back to Detroit in 1982. Miss Franklin was deeply traumatized in 1983 by a ride through turbulence in a two-engine plane that was dipsy-doodling all over the place, she recalled. She gave up flying, traveling instead by bus to her shows, and ended all international performances. In recent years, she had hoped to desensitize herself and fly again, even if it's just one more time, she said in 2007. Miss Franklin changed labels in 1980 to Arista. There, her albums mingled remakes of the 1960s and 70s hits. Jumpin' Jack Flash, Everyday People, Hold On, I'm Comin', What a Fool Believes, with contemporary songs. Miss Franklin stayed musically ambitious. She repeatedly announced plans to study classical piano and finally learned to sight read music at the Juilliard School, but she never enrolled. She received several honorary degrees, including from Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. In Miss Franklin's music, the politics were mostly personal, even when she sang about being young, gifted, and black. But through the profundity and ubiquity of her songs, she became the multi-octave voice of the civil rights movement, performing at rallies staged by the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a family friend, and, later, at King's funeral. She was a force of nature on stage, and she won 3 Grammys in the new millennium, the final one in 2008 when she and Bleege were awarded the Grammy for Best Gospel Performance for Never Gonna Break My Faith. Accurately, if immodestly, Miss Franklin accepted the regal moniker, the Queen of Soul. "It's an acknowledgement of my art," she once said. "It means I am excelling at my art and my first love, and I am most appreciative." Rest in peace.